All right, this is my informative speech. This is my audience, my wife, and Justin and Caden. There are long-term effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. More than 13 million Americans have PTSD at any given time. In my first 6 years in the Army, I was deployed for almost half of that time, 29 months. I will not go into detail, but I will say this. War has changed me. Most who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder make a full recovery. For others, the effects of this illness never go away. I would now like to read a poem of one of my experiences of my first deployment to Iraq. Whitaker. Today all we could do was cry. Why did our fellow soldier have to die? It's going to be hard to say goodbye. We will never be the same. We will always remember this day. In our hearts he will forever stay. I saw and spoke to PFC Whitaker just a day before he died. A day does not go by that I do not think or am reminded of his death. Symptoms of PTSD can show up as early as a few days, months, and sometimes years. Why should PTSD be talked about? PTSD can lead to other health problems such as depression, anxiety, drinking, and drug abuse. The health problems can potentially have great impact on cities and communities as well. I chose this topic because I am personally affected by PTSD. I feel that there are stereotypes about PTSD that need to be addressed. Those that are affected need to be heard. A majority of my information was from the Veterans Administration and other reliable websites. What is post-traumatic stress disorder? PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health problem. It is triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. More often than not, PTSD is undiagnosed for many years and often isn't diagnosed until the sufferer has done something that sees them arrested or in the back of an ambulance or police car. Does PTSD last forever? Most people who go through post-traumatic stress events have temporary difficulty adjusting and coping, but time and good self-care will alleviate this illness. If the symptoms get worse or last for months or even years and can interfere with day-to-day functioning, you may have PTSD. The length of time varies on how long someone might experience symptoms of PTSD. A person has symptoms 1 month of an event in most cases to be diagnosed with PTSD. For some, PTSD symptoms do fade over time. Others do not. And they may find that their symptoms increase as they are reminded of the event, like the anniversary of the event occurring. Immediate treatment is key to combat this illness. This does not always happen. There is a stigma among the majority of Americans about mental illnesses, and this carries over into individuals that have it to get help. We've talked about PTSD and what it is, and now let's consider the medical risks of long-term post-traumatic stress disorder. Long-term post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological trauma that causes both acute and affects the victims long-term. Acute trauma is the mind and body's response immediately after the event and may include confusion, disassociation, panic, agitation, or amnesia. Some people will develop acute stress disorder, which is a less severe illness, with symptoms reoccurring for up to 4 weeks. An estimated 80% of those with ASD will go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Other factors that influence an individual's response to trauma does include gender, the severity of the event, the existence of a support system, and early intervention, as I stated previous. Researchers also believe that personality or psychological differences may impact the severity of the trauma or of the response. Trauma that causes PTSD is associated with many chronic conditions and diseases. They are heart disease, high blood pressure, liver disease, chronic pain conditions, and are just some of the major health risks associated with this disease. There is an association between chronic PTSD and illness. Combat veterans with PTSD were 2 to 3 times more likely to develop heart disease as those without and were in poor overall health despite having control over their combat injuries. We have talked about the long-term risk and the short-term symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now let's consider the impact of PTSD on communities and cities. Community violence can include many events. These events may include cruel acts such as being shot, raped, stabbed, or beaten. Witnessing in these events can also be a factor to PTSD. The availability of help is limited in some communities and cities. This causes those who may need help to fall in between the cracks. Untreated PTSD is dangerous for the individual and who they are around. This may cause a person to commit crimes that they may not have done if they had received proper treatment. Public understanding is key in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Like any illness, mental or physical, PTSD doesn't exist in a vacuum. A misunderstanding by the general public has the possibility to compound the issue of this disease. An example of the public's negative impact towards PTSD: in 2012, San Diego residents were upset when the VA proposed building a residential treatment center for vets who suffered from PTSD and or other traumatic brain injuries near a school. This shows the ignorance that is shown towards individuals and post-traumatic stress disorder. The ultimate goal is to better oneself and retain the ability to function and contribute to society. We have talked about how post-traumatic stress can impact communities. Now let me conclude in what I hope has been an interesting presentation. You now know that there are long terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and not only affects former military, but it also affects the general population. Understanding PTSD can take away the stigma that is associated with it and other mental illnesses. Understanding what PTSD is, knowing the symptoms, treatment options, and the impact on communities can overall help with the treatment and the public accepting this as an illness that can happen to anyone, not just those who are in the military or have been in the military. I am living proof that someone with PTSD can get better and function in society and contribute to the community. It has not been easy. My family has endured a lot of this along with me in this treatment process. It took hours of counseling and support by my family and friends. Thank you for listening.